The New Orleans Saints have a massive opportunity ahead of them this weekend, and they cannot afford to mess it up. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we'll take a look at where the Saints fall now in the 2026 draft order after the Sunday slate is finished. We'll also take a look at the Saints, just kind of catching up on them. How are they ranked? Where do they sit? We'll kind of look at them across the league. And then, of course, we'll kick everything off today with a major opportunity for the New Orleans Saints, as well as potentially for rookie quarterback Tyler Shough, as well as the Atlanta Falcons look as vulnerable as ever. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us, this time making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you very much for helping us get here as we bring you your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can win $300 as a new customer if you win your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. The New Orleans Saints have a major opportunity ahead of them this weekend up against the Atlanta Falcons, who are going to be hobbling, it looks like, their way here to New Orleans. Couple things that I want to take a look at here. There are some injury concerns for Atlanta. There's a bit of a tailspin for Atlanta, which we broke down in our bonus Saturday episode. If you didn't catch that, you can go back and catch that. And we'll take a look at the opportunity that sits here for New Orleans, which is actually where I want to start. The opportunity that sits here for New Orleans is an interesting one because there is sort of this thing about should they win games? Should they not necessarily push to win games? Should they kind of let the dominoes fall as they may? All these other things. But I think that when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons, everyone's on the same page. You try to win the football game, right? You do win the football game. And make no mistake about it, this is a team that still has veterans. This is a team that has a dedicated coaching staff. This is a team that wants its fans to be buying into what it's trying to put out on the field. And the only way they're going to do that is by winning football games. And so you might as well go out there and do everything you can to win football games. And especially in a situation here where you have a real chance to revitalize and rejuvenate your fan base a bit. If the quarterback looks good, if you win football games, but most of all, if you beat the Atlanta Falcons, who, look, not every Saints fan agrees on who should be the quarterback. Not every Saints fan agrees on how the team has gone to manage itself post Sean Payton and post Drew Brees. Not every Saints fan agrees with a lot of different things, right? Different Saints fans will feel different ways about different topics. The one thing that every Saints fan will always have the same answer to is, would you like to see the Saints beat the Falcons? The answer will always be yes. And so going into this weekend, the first matchup between these two teams of the season, the Atlanta Falcons coming here to town, coming to New Orleans. They're coming to your house. This is a major opportunity. This is a good galvanizing opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to galvanize their fan base with a very strong and ideally for them, decisive victory over the Atlanta Falcons. Even as a rebuilding team, you want to beat the Falcons. Even as a team that is staring down the potential path of a top 5 overall selection, you want to beat the Falcons. Even as a team that could be better off losing games right now than winning games, you want to beat the Falcons. The New Orleans Saints beating the Falcons on Sunday, this upcoming Sunday, would be huge for them and certainly could be big for the fan base as well. So some of the things that Atlanta's dealing with right now coming out of their loss to the Carolina Panthers, interesting, and a decisive, or not decisive loss, but an interesting game, right? 30-27, one of the several games on Sunday that ended in a game-winning field goal. Divisional game, you know how those can always get weird. But now all of a sudden, the Carolina Panthers, who last week when the Saints beat them weren't very good. Remember that? Oh, they're not a good team. But the Falcons were supposed to be a really good team. That was a team that won the offseason. They were offseason champions, all these other things. Carolina's now 6-5. Arizona's now dropped to 3-7. The Saints sit at 2-8. If the Saints beat them, the Saints and the Falcons would be tied at 3-8 at the bottom of the conference. And by the way, the Saints would be ahead of them in third place in that case because the Falcons, they would have the head-to-head win over them. The Falcons are going to be coming to town, potentially without Michael Penix Jr. and with Kirk Cousins in the lineup. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Kirk Cousins is a veteran quarterback. That might actually be worse for the Saints than facing Michael Penix. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think that Kirk Cousins is the strongest quarterback. He went in relief of Michael Penix late in that game and completed 42% of his passes against that Carolina Panthers defense that we just watched Tyler Shough have a really good game against. Kirk Cousins is 1-3 in his 4 appearances at New Orleans in the regular season. So like there's certain elements to this that actually kind of tell you that it's better to face Kirk Cousins than it is to face Michael Penix. And oh, by the way, Michael Penix has been the starting quarterback for most of the year. Kirk Cousins would be kind of back to the game as an older veteran quarterback getting his first start in a little while. I believe he played earlier this season. And so like, it's not like it's his first start of the year or first playing time of the year or anything like that, but there is something to that. But they also are the Falcons dealing with an injury to Drake London as well. Now, according to Adam Schefter over at ESPN, MRI came back more positive, but he could still potentially miss some time. So he might be good to go this weekend. He might not be good to go this weekend. The Saints have been very fortunate or lucky. I don't know really what is the right, like sensitive term to use because we are talking about people being hurt here. But there was a time in the past, within the very recent past, where every wide receiver managed to just get healthy just in time to play against the Saints and then ended up going off inevitably in those games. But this season, whether it be week 2 with the San Francisco 49ers, maybe it was a little bit later on in the year and other occasions, but there have been several occasions here so far for New Orleans where certain big name players have not been available to go up against them. Now, the Saints have still found ways to lose most of those games, but this could be where things kind of change for the Saints coming out of the bye week where they've had a little bit of that recalibration time, some of that self-scout time. Above all else, where the Atlanta Falcons were said to have won the offseason was over on the defensive side. Well, they just allowed Bryce Young to throw for 448 passing yards, as well as 3 passing touchdowns, and a quarterback rating of 123.3. Now, remember, he had an extra drive because of overtime, but even just before overtime, he was at 394, 396, something like that. By the way, this is the Bryce Young that the Saints defense last week held to only 124 passing yards and no touchdowns with an interception. So Atlanta's defense might be very vulnerable, or much more vulnerable than maybe we anticipated, particularly on the back end and in coverage. And so if Tyler Shough is going to come out and have that same gunslinger mentality that he had in Carolina, that could end up being a lot of fun to watch. So the Saints have a major opportunity here, as does rookie quarterback Tyler Shough, going up against a vulnerable Atlanta Falcons team, an opportunity they cannot squander upcoming this weekend. All right, coming up next, we'll take a look at where the Saints sit in terms of all of their kind of offensive and defensive rankings. We're just going to kind of catch up on them here after spending a bit of a week away from talking about them on the field. Let's dive into that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Mint Mobile. Are you tired of overpaying for your wireless? Well, now it's time for you to start saying yes to saying no, because no is, and this is true, Mint Mobile's favorite word. They say things like no contracts, no overages, no monthly bills, no hidden fees, no BS. It's kind of the Mint Mobile way, saying no to all of those things. That's why so many people are saying yes to Mint Mobile right now and getting premium wireless for just $15 a month. Mint makes it super easy to make the switch as well. All plans come with everything that you know and love: high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, all on the nation's largest 5G network. So you ready to start saying yes to saying no? Well, head over and make the switch at mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. Upfront payment of $45 is required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for the first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigs, on the unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints just wrapped up their bye week, and now they're back to getting ready to go up against the Atlanta Falcons. We'll take a look at some of the Saints rankings in terms of where they are around the NFL going into this game. But I want to continue our conversation from where we started the show to a little bit more about the big opportunity that's ahead for the New Orleans Saints, because the opportunity isn't just for New Orleans, but the opportunity is for the Saints' kind of young core as well. We talked about how over the course of the last 7 games, there's a few things that we wanted to watch. Obviously, the quarterback position is going to very much be in focus. The run game is going to very much be in focus. Kellen Moore's play calling, game management, all those things very much in there. Defense, will they stop giving up, so much space? All these other things. We'll see if any of that stuff goes. But one of the other things we talked about was like the building blocks, right? The young players that can effectively lay the foundation for the future for New Orleans. And several of those players are going to get some real opportunities here up against Atlanta this weekend. And so the chances or the things that matter for New Orleans don't stop to just the team as a whole on collectively and their draft status and all those other things. The other things that it comes down to is some of these players are going to be the big time kind of building blocks for this organization. So with that being the case, let's take a look at a few of these. We'll start off with Tyler Shough, obviously big opportunity ahead of him. We just talked about how Bryce Young, who had only thrown for over 200 yards once this season, one time, ended up throwing for that twice in this game, 448 yards up against Atlanta on Sunday in week 11. And so big opportunity here potentially for Tyler Shough, who is aggressive, who likes to attack, who wants to go deep, who wants to take some of those deep shots, likes giving his receivers opportunities to go out there and make a play. This is a secondary that could provide some of those opportunities to Tyler Shough and New Orleans. So that'll definitely be a big part of what we'll be watching. Another player that's going to be in kind of big time focus every single one of those snaps on offense is going to be Kelvin Banks Jr. Kelvin Banks Jr. right now is tied for having surrendered the 3rd most pressures in the NFL amongst all offensive linemen, not just tackles, not, comparing him to just interior offensive linemen, if there were any weird reason for me to do that. And regardless of draft class, we're not talking about just rookies. He's allowed 30. There are 2 players with 32. And then there was another player with 37 that was going into week 11. Now, a couple of things to know about that. Kelvin Banks Jr. obviously had played an additional game. He had played 10, while a lot of players on that list had played 9, but a lot of players on that list had also played 10. And so right now, that number is probably looking a little bit different, but going into the bye week, that's where he ranked. And so giving up a lot of pressure, but only 3 sacks, 2 of them coming in the same game just a few weeks ago. And so for Kelvin Banks Jr., he's played extremely well. He's just had a couple of kind of not bad games, but a couple of numerically underwhelming performances when it comes to what he has surrendered pressure-wise based on the pressure numbers collected by Pro Football Focus, right? So take all of that for what you will. But now he's got the opportunity to where he's going to have to show what he's got against guys like James Pierce Jr., show what he's got against guys like Jalen Walker and other pass rushers for Atlanta, who are going to be wanting to pin their ears back and go after Tyler Shough. The Saints invested in quarterback and offensive line heavily over the course of the offseason. The Atlanta Falcons invested at edge rusher. And so who wins out in terms of their investment? So that will be a big part of what we're looking at as well. And then, of course, going back to the Drake London potential injury, even if he's hampered a little bit, that means that young guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, Alontae Taylor, as well as Quincy Riley, I'll throw in Jonas Sanker in there, along with the veteran leadership of Justin Reed. The secondary has a chance to impress this weekend, either going up against Drake London and trying to limit him if they can find a way to do that, or potentially not having to face Drake London going into this game. So we'll kind of see where things rest for all those players, but lots of building block opportunities. And those guys aren't the only ones, right? There's other players in the defensive line, at linebacker, at wide receiver, at tight end, and the backfield and the offensive line. There's a lot more of these players around, but I just wanted to highlight some of the impact for some of those players. All right, let's take a look at a couple different things about where the Saints rank across the NFL now after the Sunday slate of bye week games. So a couple of things that I want to highlight for New Orleans. The Saints, interestingly enough, when it comes to their passing offense, they are 20th in the NFL in passing yards. Not great, not terrible either. They're not in the 30s, but they're also not in the top half of the NFL. So they are in the bottom half of the NFL. But one of the things that is most kind of surprising is they've only thrown 11 passing touchdowns so far this season. It's one of the reasons why they're the 30th ranked scoring offenses, or that they are the 30th ranked scoring offense in the NFL right now. And so the reason why that's important is the Saints need to show more prowess, not only in terms of scoring, but in particular scoring touchdowns, which has been a big time task for this New Orleans Saints team. Now, we'll see how things change, but even at the height of optimism for New Orleans, which were the 2 wins that they've had, one win was with just 26 points. The other one was with just 17 points last week. And so seeing the Saints come out of the gate following this bye week by not just putting points on the board, but scoring touchdowns would be a very, very welcome change for New Orleans down the stretch. And again, this is a team that the Carolina Panthers just scored 30 against. Bryce Young just threw for, a career game against, all that. There should be some opportunities there for New Orleans to do that. Now, on the defensive side, when it comes to the passing game, the Saints defense is actually top 10 in passing yards allowed. And I know that doesn't feel right because there's so much space in that defense and it feels like so many passes get completed and a ton of passes do indeed get completed against the New Orleans Saints defense. But I think that's kind of how they like to play. I don't know if I like that, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I like it or not. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But they don't allow a lot of yards. They're actually ranked 9th right now in the NFL in passing yards. The issue is that they've surrendered 18 passing touchdowns, which ranks them number 24 in the NFL. So they're bottom 10 in terms of the amount of passing touchdowns that they have allowed. So that's something that we're going to be watching out for over the course of this next stretch of games as well. And in particular, going up against a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins, which is what we expect will happen with Michael Penix Jr. dealing with injury. On the rushing side, the Saints 28th in the NFL when it comes to rushing offense in terms of yards. 32nd, dead last when it comes to scoring in rushing because they only have 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. Definitely want to see that run game get better down the stretch. But then their rushing defense, 21st. Again, not awful, not bottom 10, but very close. Still bottom half of the league, however. And then 16th in rushing touchdowns, having only allowed 9. So they're right in the middle when it comes to that. So those are kind of where the Saints sit in terms of major statistical categories. And so we'll see exactly where the Saints are when they get back, right? Are they still that team or are they looking a little bit different and cooking a little bit different here in the back half of the season? Those are numbers, rankings. We want to see pump up a little bit as they go on. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at where the Saints sit right now when it comes to the draft order after the Sunday slate of games. Let's get to that next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than over at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the beginning of a game, you can still get in on the action, whether you want to ride the hot hand by betting on who will be the next player to score, or perhaps you're looking at that fourth quarter comeback. You can get in on all of that over at FanDuel. You can even put certain live bets together to create a live bet same game parlay, which gives you a chance at an even bigger payout as well. It helps to keep the game more exciting, especially when it's your team making that late push, and maybe more likely now for the Pelicans with Willie Green finally ousted here in New Orleans. And so the everything going on over at FanDuel, you can get in on that and the Pelicans here throughout the rest of their season. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints no longer hold the number 2 overall selection in the NFL draft after Sunday's slate of games. A couple of different things happened that have now pushed the New Orleans Saints a little bit further down, up, down, a little bit further down the draft board. So now they moved from number 2 to number 3. And then that was after the early afternoon slate. But then after the late afternoon slate, they moved from number 3 to number 4. So Saints right now hold the number 4 overall selection in this year's NFL draft. Still within the top 5, but not within the top 3 anymore like they once were. So here's how this happened. So the Tennessee Titans lost again. So they now fell to 1-9, officially and continually the worst team in the NFL. And so they are sitting with the number 1 overall selection currently and are in line to have it for a second year in a row. Then what happened was the Saints also ended up being leapt by the New York Giants, who lost their game with Jameis Winston, former New Orleans Saints quarterback, starting that game. The reason why the Giants leapt the Saints, because this might only be temporary, the Giants leapt the Saints because the Giants have not yet had their bye week. So instead of them being 2-8 like the New Orleans Saints are with 2 wins, they're actually 2-9. So they have more losses, which means that their win-loss record is lower, like their winning percentage is lower. And so that helped them leap the Saints. And that's when the Saints got bumped down from number 2 to number 3. Now, if the Tennessee Titans had won their game against the Houston Texans, which every element was there for them to do exactly that. CJ Stroud got hurt. Davis Mills went in at quarterback, all this other stuff. But even still, the Titans found a way to lose. Had that happened because the Titans actually have a stronger strength of schedule than New Orleans does, New Orleans would have still been ahead of Tennessee in that case. So they would have stayed at number 2. It just would have been a change at number 1. However, then the Cleveland Browns went on and lost. And that ended up actually creating some conversation that we'll get into here in a little bit about what happened in that Browns game that was not relevant, but yet still relevant to a lot of Saints fans who were discussing quarterback situations. So we'll talk about that here in just a sec. But because the Browns lost, they now leap into number 3 because the Browns, believe it or not, actually have an even easier strength of schedule than the Saints have in this season so far. So according to our good friends over at Tankathon, the Saints now sit with the number 4 overall selection at 2-8, tied with the New York Jets. The division between the Saints and the Jets, though, is that the Jets have a tougher strength of schedule, so they fall a little bit later. Now, the Saints will still play the Giants later on this season. The Giants will have their bye week eventually. The Saints will still play the New York Jets later on this season. No, they won't play the Giants. They already played the Giants, but the Giants will have their bye week. The Saints will play the New York Jets later on this season. Sorry about that. And then the Saints will also play Tennessee later on in the season. So some opportunities there for the Saints to either win or lose or whatever their way into whatever draft pick they end up with. But it is very interesting. And oh, by the way, if the Saints and Falcons, once they meet this upcoming weekend, if the Saints beat the Falcons, then the Saints will be 3-8, while the Falcons will fall to 3-9, which means that the Falcons will get a better draft pick than the Saints if the Saints win that game. But that's okay because you want the Saints to beat the Falcons. So you'll take that, I'm sure. So that's kind of where things sit for New Orleans. That doesn't really put them out of position to potentially grab any kind of impact certainly for impact player or anything like that. Like at pick number 4, you still could find your way to a Caleb Downs. I don't know whether Arvell Reese or Ruben Bain make it to you in today's understanding of the draft, which is going to change and change and change and change and change by the time that we get to April, of course. But it still puts you in position for players like Caleb Downs, the safety out of Ohio State, Arizona State wide receiver Jordan Tyson would be still somebody that's in range. Ohio State wide receiver Carnell Tate still in range. Clemson edge rusher TJ Parker still in range. So there's still a lot of those players that would still kind of be in that area where you would absolutely be able to find impact at a number of positions there. Jeremiah Love, the running back out of Notre Dame. Like there's a lot of different players you could end up leaning in on over the course of that early portion of the NFL draft. So the Saints in position there still. I mentioned we were going to speak a little bit, but that's where the Saints pick. They still pick at pick 4 right now, but still in position to really help themselves in 2025 and 2026. And honestly, I'll tell you this right now. As long as the Saints are drafting inside the top 10, they give themselves an opportunity to have a huge impact. I would just love for them to draft high enough to get Arvell Reese. That's all that I really care about. But there's so many other players that can also end up helping them too. I mentioned that we were going to have a brief conversation because I don't want to like fire up this firestorm too quickly. But I did want to have a brief conversation about the Shedeur Sanders conversation. Somebody hit the dramatic music or whatever. Dun dun dun. The immediate. I watched this happen. The response to how Shore Sanders going into the game, and then he completed a pass, and then I saw people like, oh, Saints should have drafted him. And then all of a sudden, like the rest of that game happened. Obviously, that did not go well for Shore Sanders going in relief of Dylan Gabriel, going in as a backup, an emergency situation, throwing to guys that he doesn't throw to very often. Like all those things were a part of it. But it was very interesting to sort of watch the Sanders Shough sort of conversations go on. And so if Sanders continues to start, will be very interesting to watch that conversation proceed across the NFL. All right, let's get on with a little bit of Lagniappe here to wrap up the show. Lagniappe, a little something extra in Cajun. So we're taking a look at a little bit extra here as we've been doing over the course of the past few weeks. We've gotten a lot of positive response from this. So I wanted to keep it going. For today's Lagniappe, I want to go back to the Alontae Taylor conversation. And this is a really interesting one. And in fact, I want to have two conversations here because they'll both be brief, but they're both contract related. So Chris Olave and Alontae Taylor are guys that have been discussed in contract negotiations. We got a little bit of an update here recently from ESPN Jeremy Fowler on some things that align with some things that I've heard and that I've mentioned on this show before that I wanted to come back to, that extension conversations with the Saints and Alontae Taylor did or have or are happening. And the recent suggestion from Fowler is that those contract negotiations didn't exactly get anywhere, and that's what made him a trade target, and that's why the Bears, as well as the Colts, both reached out. However, the Saints didn't trade Alontae Taylor. So it makes you wonder if maybe they're going to re-engage those conversations, maybe they'll revisit at the end of the year, whatever it might be, or let him test the market, see what he can get out on the market, come back to you, say, this is what I got, and then see if there's anything that you can work out through there. But this backs up some things that I've heard, which is that there is a price that is wanted, there is a price that is offered, and that there's a gap in between. That's kind of the most that I can say. And so it's kind of the most that I'm comfortable saying. And I don't want to put numbers out there and stuff like that, because like if one number's off, then all of a sudden Ross is a big fat liar, pants on fire. And I just don't want to go through all that. So my understanding is that like they're not close, right? It's not increasingly far away or anything like that, but like it's not there yet. And so it'll be interesting just to see if like those conversations continue. But it sounds like whatever that halt was and whatever that gap was enough to maybe say, you know what, well, let's see what the market looks like in terms of trade market and things like that. But Saints ended up not doing that. So will be very interesting to see if they revisit the conversation before free agency begins, or if he just goes into free agency and then goes to see what kind of money he could get out there. Fowler mentioned like $18 million being like a previous precedent. And I think that's probably the highest that you're probably going to go as a team, but I'll be curious to see exactly like what those numbers actually look like, either offered this but didn't take it, or what he gets if he goes somewhere else or if he stays here in New Orleans. So just a little update on that. Chris Olave, meanwhile, those extension conversations do continue as he continues to be open, honest, and transparent about those. He appeared on Kay Adams' Up and Adams show. She asked him about his update. He said that it's in the works. It's in the works hot, is what he said, and that he wants to stay in New Orleans forever. Said he loves the people, he loves the culture, he loves the community. I know Alontae feels very similar too. And so like, it's just cool to hear like guys that say like, hey, look, want to be here, period, and everything like that. And Alontae's made similar comments too. And so we'll see exactly how things eventually boil out. Like nothing's done until it's done. But in any case, like those are two of the big contract negotiation players that we'll be watching going into the offseason and through the offseason. So every now and then we'll get a little update, and I'll always make sure that I bring it here to the show for you. All right, on tomorrow's episode, highest graded, lowest graded players and Falcons Hate Week. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, you can find us every single weekday on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Thanks for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, know what the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.